Good morning. This is the New York City Board of Standards and Appeals Public Review Session for April 29, 2014. We'll begin with the special order calendar. Decision items. Item number 1, 5-28BZ, 664 New York Avenue, Brooklyn.
Any questions? We were not waiting for anything.
No. Okay. Item number 2, 19705BZ, 813, 815 Broadway, Manhattan.
Since our first hearing, the applicant revised their application to request a waiver. Any questions?
Item number 3, 24709BZ, 123 East 55th Street, Manhattan.
We had closed the hearing at the last public session. Since then, the applicant has requested a waiver, the board's rule regarding authorization for all parties or owners of the zoning lot. In this particular case, there are 4 buildings, including the subject building. The applicant has provided owner's authorization for 3 of those. They have provided into the record evidence of outreach to the 4th party, and we had noted to them that if they didn't get the owner's authorization, we would reopen the hearing, and here is the owner of the outstanding party who want to testify or contest this. This morning, I received a letter which will be distributed to the board that they have retained counsel, and we can speak at tomorrow's hearing as well. So we will reopen the case.
Continued hearing items. Item number 4, 473 541 6th Street, Brooklyn.
This is an application for an amendment to New York Methodist's previously approved special permit and variance. We had this case last time with the accompanying variance application. Since then, we've received a waiver from the community board regarding the review of this application. As you know, the amendment of the previous approval was a result of ongoing discussions with the community board regarding the larger enlargement and expansion proposal from New York Methodist. As a result of that, they made changes to this particular garage and also provided parking within the garage that is before us for spaces that would otherwise be provided in the larger project. Are there any questions? Commissioner Marquez?
Yes, I just thought it would be helpful to have a chart explaining what was prior approved, what was the parking required previously. They've put it in a narrative form, but I think it would be easier to understand by putting it all in a chart.
Okay, we can ask them to provide us a chart. Maybe they can provide that to us tomorrow. Okay, any other questions? All right.
Item number 5, 18696BZ, 145-2125 Liberty Avenue, Queens.
The applicant made a submission. Any questions and comments?
Well, they're no longer seeking an extension without term. They've, I think, now asked for 15 years rather than 10.
All right, I believe that,
Initially, they wanted a renewal with no term.
was it no term? I thought they always said 15 years, but I may be wrong.
Okay.
All right, I don't think we should give them the 15-year term. This grant expired in 2003.
Right.
So I think at the most, we should give them 5 years. That'll give them the 15, or we can give them 15 years from 2003. But I don't see any reason to give them 15 years starting from this date. They were errant in asking for the renewal. The CFO clearly stated the expiration date. They didn't do their due diligence. I don't see why we should give them any compensation for that. Good.
I don't
Yes.
think they responded to our questions regarding signage also.
Right.
All right.
I'm just making it clear that they're not asking to change the permitted uses that appear on the current CO, correct?
They're not, and they claim that the uses that occupy the space right now fall within the categories that were identified by the board in its approval. Okay.
Item number 8, 17899BZ, 8973-95 Bay Parkway, Brooklyn.
At the the last hearing, we had a few outstanding issues. I know that they revised their financial. I was fine with it. The commissioners okay with it?
They included a narrative as to why they took out the Quebec court sale, and so I was fine with that as well.
Okay. And Commissioner Martinez, I know they corrected the mistake
Yes,
regarding the
that's
square
right.
footage.
That's good.
All right. Other questions or comments?
DOT had a comment concerning utilizing the 2010 seeker manual, and the applicant replied that since they were similar to Brooklyn Bay Center, they didn't have to utilize the 2010, but it appeared that DOT requested the update because I guess there's no trip linkage, as I put it, permitted under the new manual, and so if they could perhaps reconcile that with DOT or tell us where they stand.
All right. Any other questions? Okay.
Item number 7, 17707BZ, 886 Glenmore Avenue, Brooklyn.
The applicant revised their plans. Now they made the buildings align. I think it's much better. And I think from an urban design perspective, it's much better. I think from a light and air perspective into the rear yards, it's much better as well. So I'm happy that they took our suggestion. Are there any questions?
New cases, item number 8, 371 and 37203BZ, 663 and 655 Fifth Avenue, Manhattan.
It's an application for an extension of term of 2 PCEs that are actually 1 PCE in 2 commercial buildings in Midtown. Are there any questions?
Appeals calendar, decision items, item number 9, 143- through 14611A, 2025-3540 Harbor Lights Court, Staten Island.
As you know, this is an appeal to the fire department's determination regarding a code variation. I would recommend that we approve and support the waiver that the applicant is asking for, as long as it is stipulated with a series of conditions, including that the slope of the road should be no less than 13.59% or 6% over the entire stretch of the road, that it could be no less than that. Sorry,
No more than that.
No more than that. I think there are some points for the board to consider that has been already discussed before. The 10% slope really does conflict with Department of City Planning's objectives for a site that's within special hillside preservation district. As you know, any approval by this board would still need to go to city planning to ensure that it complies with those regulations. I know that residents in the neighborhood were concerned about whether the site plan actually meets those requirements. I just want to give them at least some comfort that this would have to go through the full city planning review as well to comply with the zoning. I think the board is aware that both city planning and the fire department have both approved a slope on the site at 13.4%. This road would be limited to 4 homes. They're going to be completely sprinkler. They're providing 2 fire hydrants, and they put on their plans, have indicated that they're going to provide signage to ensure that there's no parking within a roadway, which will be a minimum of 30 feet. I know, Commissioner Martinez, you have some suggestions also.
Right, I suggested that they contact DOT to get a recommended paving that would provide maximum traction on the road, and I think DOT has some suggestions. And the other thing is that I just had some concerns regarding the slope coming up to the intersection of the city street at Howard Avenue. That intersection has to be approved with a builder's pavement plan, so there could be some further restrictions on the slope at that intersection.
That seems fine, and our resolution can include that. They would have to go through DOT to get the builder's pavement plan approved. My understanding is that they will look at that intersection, and we have put in a resolution condition that they should look at surfaces for the roads in consultation with DOT to ensure that there's proper traction. I know that there are 2 methods that's often used. One has to do with creating porous surface, so the water actually goes into the ground and there's no sort of coating of ice. And the second is that you create striations along the road to ensure that it's actually an uneven surface. So we can ask them to review that with DOT. Are there any questions? All right. I also thought it was helpful that the applicant provided us with a series of roadways that had slopes that were similar or greater than what was being provided in this particular case. I had gone to a few which was first identified in the application, and they identified a few more in their recent set of papers. I know Commissioner Martinez had gone to those streets as well, and she found some parallels. I think there was one which was...
Well, most of the roads that were larger or greater than this 13.6 I found to be not recommended, because I personally have experienced that in the wintertime you sometimes cannot go up some of these roads. But the 13.6, especially on Longview below Wetmore, I thought was a drivable road. It was a similar situation where it was curvy and it accessed a number of homes where there really wasn't other access. And, it's been in service for many years.
Okay. Thank you for visiting the sites. Are there any other comments? Oh,
Continued hearing items, item number 10, 26607A, 1602 1610 Avenue West, Brooklyn.
the applicant's asked for an adjournment.
Item number 11, 80-11A through 84, 85-11A, and 103-11A, 335, 333, East 331, 329 East 9th Street, Manhattan.
The applicant recently submitted papers making the argument that the board has the authority to waive section 211 in full, and that is with the objection that they received. Just as a matter of authority, the applicant's correct. It is a height and bulk regulation, and section 310 of multiple dwelling allows the board to waive that. Having said that, in order to waive 211, at least in my opinion, it would be very hard for the board to really engage in any analysis of practical difficulty and unnecessary hardship without understanding which sections of the MDL that they cannot comply with. Just this broad waiver itself will not satisfy that finding. And therefore, ultimately, the board will have to review the objections that were initially identified by the Buildings Department, at least in my opinion, to be able to make any of these findings and support this project. So I think we finally go back to what was initially submitted and the analysis that they provided us. Some of them are still outstanding. I know the board had some questions, and why don't we hear what the board has to say about the initial set of objections, because ultimately that's still on the table for us. Yes, Susan?
I still had some open questions concerning exactly what it is that they needed us to waive. And it still isn't really very clear to me, the specifics and exactly where it is and why they cannot comply. Fire stopping, certain ratings for walls. It was not clear, and I think they really need to be definitive and show exactly where the issue is and why they can't do it. So I understand the new theory here of waiving 211, but I agree that they have to be specific as to exactly which points that they want us to look at.
Okay. Commissioner Martinez?
I agree entirely. I think at the first hearing, I had asked them to specifically go through section 152 and show why they could not comply or what was required to comply, and they really have not done that. They have not explained. They've just said, well, going into any of the apartments will be impossible, and they really didn't explain what had to be done at all. So I think that's, to me, the biggest concern, the fire stopping.
I think that if you go back to the board's previous approval, and this is an amendment to that approval, the analysis that they did at in the last case was, I think, much more, relying much more on actual evidence in the record. I think they showed us what complying plans look like, and they actually identified the costs associated with putting those, with complying with the MDL. I think in this case, they sort of piggybacked on their earlier analysis and said, well, it's the same reasoning, and therefore you should be granted these waivers as well. And I think while some of them are related to the waivers that were previously granted, others are not. And in order for us to support this, they really should do similar analysis as we did for the previous case. Are there other questions? All right.
Item number 12, do you want me to call 12 and 13 together?
Yes.
Okay. Item number 12, 16612A, and item number 13, 10713A, 638 East 11th Street, Manhattan.
The applicant has asked for adjournment. I know that they're working with the Buildings Department. The applicant believes that the Buildings Department may withdraw the application to revoke the certificate of occupancy, so they would like a couple of months to do that. Any concerns with that? Oh, I know my mic isn't working. The applicant has asked for an adjournment to work with the Buildings Department on the certificate of occupancy case.
New cases, item number 14, 43-14A, 242 West 76th Street, Manhattan.
All right, questions and comments?
It wasn't,
I think we were done. Okay.
it wasn't clear to me, do they still have an outstanding DOB violation?
I went into the BIS system, and it seems that they have one open violation from DOB, and they have to cure that in order for the board to support this extension. And we are also waiting for the fire department to sign off. I know they've done an inspection, and the objection was dismissed, but it's, I think it'd be good for the record if the fire department actually signs off on it. Are there any questions? Any other comments on this case?
No?
I think this one's working. Oh, good. Thank you.
Zoning calendar, decision items, item number 1, 211-12BZ, 164 Coffee Street, Brooklyn.
We'll have to defer the decision. We're still waiting for DEP to sign off.
Item number 2, 130-13BZ, 1590 Nostrand Avenue, Brooklyn.
Any comments or questions? We weren't waiting for anything.
Item number 3, 163-13BZ, 133-10 39th Avenue, Queens.
We received revised drawings. Are there any questions? Okay.
Item number 4, 179-13BZ, 933-939 East 24th Street, Brooklyn.
Any questions or issues on this case? Okay.
Item number 5, 228-13BZ, 157 Columbus Avenue, Manhattan.
After we closed our last hearing, prior to closing our hearing, we asked the applicant to ensure that they had followed the board's rules and provided all submissions subsequent to the hearing to all the parties that are identified in our rules, which includes the community board, the borough president, the elected official, and that's a council member, and the Department of City Planning. Since then, in the submissions that were given to us in this past period, as well as the earlier submissions, the applicant has shown that they provided that to all the 4 entities. As a result of that, and to ensure that our process follows the rules, I recommend that we reopen the hearing, and we will allow these parties, if they would like to submit anything into the record. Having said this, I believe that the applicant still has provided us enough evidence to support this project. I think that we should take into consideration several conditions as to ensure the proper functioning of this physical cultural establishment. I think, first of all, we should note that the PC is 6,500 square feet, and we've seen many PCEs, and I think we have to recognize this one of the smaller PCEs. And in fact, PCs of this size without showers would actually be allowed as of right. So it's something to take into consideration in terms of what we're talking about here. This is not an enormous, large physical cultural establishment that is on many floors. It's really just 6,500 square feet. I think we should include conditions that ensures that the R8B section is not used at all by the PCE, either for storage or any accessory use. That has been reflected in the drawings as well. We'll have a condition, even though it's on the plans, that the sound attenuation measures, which include 2 levels of flooring and rubber pads, as well as this other material which is being put on vertical walls that are adjacent to the area that connects to the residential corridor and laundry space, as shown in the plans, should be put in place. At one point, the applicant had, in fact, cut down on the sound attenuation, but in the recent drawings, they went back to the earlier proposal to include it over the entire PCE space. We should limit the hours. I think what seems to be reasonable are hours, and I'm going to recommend them, that it's 6 to 9 from Monday to Friday, and 9 to 6 on Saturdays and Sundays. I know that the opposition has asked for narrower hours, but I think in reality, a lot of PCEs do need to capture people who want to come to the facility in the early mornings before going to work and after work. So I think 6 to 9 seems to be a reasonable set of hours during the week where people are actually working and still can use the space. We can include a condition that alerts the buildings department to actually look at the occupancy, including the equipment, and this should address the concerns about the number of weights that are being used here and the structure of the building. We should set a time frame in which the applicants complete the sound attenuation and receive a C of O. And we can discuss that with them tomorrow, but I think we should have a very short time frame. The PC is not going to discontinue during this period, but I think we want to make sure that the sound attenuation measures are put in place as soon as possible. And finally, I think we should impose a term. Opposition recommended 2 years. I think that seems reasonable. It gives the board the comfort that they will follow the board's conditions and ensure that the sound attenuation is put in place. And if we hear any complaints, we're able to monitor it over a 2-year period, after 2 years. Does that seem reasonable to the board members?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, are there any other suggestions that the board members would like to make regarding conditions?
There was one issue that I'm not certain of whether or not it's been resolved, and that was the practice of allowing employees of the PCE to basically do private training sessions in hours other than when it is open to the general public.
Well,
I don't
yes.
know if there's a way
Well, I
to
think.
limit that other than by just doing the hours.
Well, I think the hours are intended that space cannot be used. Now, there was a separate issue about whether they should be given keys. I think giving keys, I personally don't have a problem if they want to have keys, as long as the space is not used after hours for any kind of training. So,
All right, I'll take a look at the conditional language and.
okay, and we have no problems in fact making it more clear in our conditions as well. I think right now the way it's been, what we sort of imagine it to be is very similar to the way that we write the conditions for any PCE. But if we want to add anything on to that, we can obviously do that as well.
Okay.
All right, and I have one other question which I think would be helpful for the applicant to answer to us, and this had to do with event days, and I think the board would like to understand if they're planning to have event days over here as they have in other facilities. Obviously, I think the concern is we don't want these event days to be many. So if it's once or twice a year, I think it seems reasonable, but I think they should just tell us. And if there are none, that's even better. This is a small space. They probably have other facilities which are larger that can accommodate more people, so they should think about not having event days at all at this space. Okay.
Item number 6, 246 13BZ, 514 49th Street, Brooklyn.
All right, any questions and comments? They provide a revised statement. Okay.
Item number 7, 270-13BZ, 288 Dover Street, Brooklyn.
All right, any issues with this?
Item number 8, 285 13BZ, 495 Flatbush Avenue, Brooklyn.
Any comments? All right.
Item number 9, 302-13BZ, 140 West 23rd Street, Manhattan.
Any issues with this? We received revised drawings which show the sound attenuation on the plats. Okay.
Continued hearing items. Item number 10, 54-12BZ, 65-39 100 Second Street, Queens.
The applicant's asked for an adjournment. I would recommend that this should be the last adjournment. We've had many. I think after the second hearing, we basically told the applicants what would be acceptable to this board. They have not provided that as yet. And I think if they're not planning to do that, we should even consider closing the hearing. So let's see if they come tomorrow. Otherwise, if they're not here, we'll just give them one more adjournment and then close out the hearing.
Item number 11, 214-12BZ, 2784 Coney Island Avenue, Brooklyn.
All right, this is for the car wash. I don't know about the other board members, but I find this project very troubling. And I'm troubled by the A finding, I'm troubled by the C finding, and even if the A finding is made, I have grave concerns about the appropriateness of having a car wash at this particular location, on this particular site, which has a frontage of only 75 feet. It's right at the corner. There's severe concerns about the ability to queue and not block the intersection, and I don't believe monitors can do that. But let's discuss the A finding first and see how the board members feel about that. As you know, they're relying on, I guess, 2 or 3 points. One is the history of the site itself, that it's always been a car wash for over 60 years. They claim that the existing building cannot be reused for commercial use. They claim that there are exorbitant costs associated with tearing down the building and removing the filtration system that was put in place. And they claim that there are costs associated with remediating the site based on speculating that there's contamination, and it would cost about close to $500,000 to clean that up. So they're relying on those actual physical conditions of the site, as well as good faith reliance on permits. Yes, comments and questions?
Well, regarding the environmental costs, I really don't think, it's really just assumptions they're making. They are saying that there may be tanks from the prior station underneath their site, but they could give us the prior approved plans of the station to indicate where the tanks are. They're saying that a gas station a quarter mile away from them might be contaminating their groundwater, but there's no evidence of that. So it's all supposition and conjecture, and there's really no basis for it. They haven't done a phase 2, so there's really nothing there.
I agree. I think that the evidence is incredibly weak. Commissioner
I
Hayes?
would have to agree. I took issue with the fact that adjacent to them, there's a complying business that was part of, at one time, part of the same lot in which there was this gas station. So my question is that if their neighbor could develop a building that is complying and seems to be doing quite well, with apparently no real contamination or that we know of, I would question that they think that they've got so much contamination on their property. I did not see any real cause to anticipate that it's going to be very expensive to dig up the filtration system. They didn't really give us any information about exactly what it is and why it would cost so much to remove, and even the demolition of the building and the property. So I just had some real questions about that, and some real questions about how they actually obtained a permit to continue the construction. I don't know what they showed to DOB. They haven't really explained that, and I have some real questions as to the validity of the permit.
Right. It seems just on the good faith reliance aspect, they applied for a permit. I think they presented it as if this use was allowed. I don't think they raised it with the buildings department of any discontinuance issue. I'm not even sure it was raised. The first permit had certain objections which were cleared with the examiner. We understand that. It was not completely self-certified. However, those objections, if you go back and look at them, are really related to the relationship of this site vis-à-vis the site that was before the board's jurisdiction. And it was really about going back to the BSA, and to which we actually said we have no jurisdiction on this site. And then they proceeded to expend about 99% of their costs until the point where they got their stop work order. And after they got their stop work order, there was much more back and forth. But really, the reliance, the expenditures in reliance on the permit was really in the first 6 to 8 months. So I think all the back and forth that takes place after that is really not relevant. And I think the commissioner was involved at that time, but that was really post expenditures. So in terms of good faith reliance, I think the applicant was on notice. They're aware and should have been aware that there's a clause in the zoning resolution which talks about 2 years discontinuance, and the loss of rights for non-conforming use. There's nothing, I think, the evidence that the record that shows that the applicants were not aware that that this use was discontinued, and it is unclear how they presented the case to the Buildings Department. I would agree with Commissioner Hinkson. So I don't even believe that they meet the threshold for good faith reliance. So at least I question that.
I agree with that. I mean, I think for a good faith reliance case, you need to at least demonstrate that you've done reasonable due diligence in finding out what the history of the site was. And I think in this case, we don't have evidence that there is. I mean, I understand that the discontinuance question is technically not before us right now, but I do think it's a relevant matter to take under consideration when we're looking at a good faith reliance claim. I also agree with Commissioner Montanez with regard to, and with the chair with regard to the alleged environmental degradation of this site. There's no evidence. It's guesswork.
All right. That's on the A finding. Are there issues with the B finding?
Well,
Yes.
I wanted to say that originally, when we discussed the B finding, we basically said that as it was a legalization, it should have been based on the vacant land. And because of that, what the financials were showing were not showing anything tied to any A case. It was almost like it was a market argument, because without the construction costs for the car wash, neither of the options would have worked. So they went back and they discovered that they might have this situation concerning contamination. And frankly, the financials now literally hinge on the legitimacy or validity of those contamination costs. Without them, we're still back to the same square one market argument. And so therefore, the B finding has not even been found yet.
Okay. All right. In terms of the C finding, I'm very concerned, and I just have a few points I'd like to make. One is that the site has 75-foot frontage along Coney Island Avenue, and it has 3 curb cuts. And that's a lot of curb cuts for such a small frontage. The main curb cut, which brings the cars into the lot, is right at the corner and very close to the intersection. If you look at the zoning resolution and you look at TPPNs that the Buildings Department has, which are related to car washes, they require you to put 10 reservoir spaces. It's almost built into the use group. It says use group 16, car wash or auto laundry with 10 spaces. Here is a case where they have no queuing space.
Except on the sidewalk.
On the sidewalk and into the street and into the intersection. I don't think there's anywhere you can put those 10 spaces until you actually block the intersection. This street, which is Coney Island Avenue, intersects with Girard Court, which is very narrow and is residential. I think that just providing a monitor is not going to deal with an issue that'll be ongoing every day. And I think that such use on this property and this intersection is wholly inappropriate. I just want to make a comment on good faith reliance. I think even if a person is able to prove good faith reliance, I think the board shall always weigh that against the neighborhood character finding, because I think fundamentally there's a problem with the board granting something just because the buildings department made a mistake that overrides the protections of people in the area. And this would have to be tested in court, but I think I can't see why any court would not understand that the board has the responsibility to ensure the appropriateness of the use vis-a-vis the surrounding buildings and residents and other community. I just don't see that. It'd be very hard, if almost impossible, for me to support this variance as a car wash on the site, given these factors. Yes?
Well, as to the character, I believe they made a statement that with the monitor, and with any queue, it would take between 15 to 20 seconds, I believe, to get into the site from the street, and I'm not convinced by that, having been a customer at many a car wash, that once you are queuing up, even if you have the vacuum stations on the other side, just to make the payment and to do the prep work that's needed in terms of just brushing the initial soap on, removing antennas, so on, that creates a backup, and that takes much longer than 20 seconds to go through a queue like that to get into the car wash. And on my way back and forth to work, I actually pass a car wash that has no queuing, and that is absolutely disruptive, and it's on the West Side Highway and disrupts traffic every rush hour. There's a queue that extends into the drive lanes, half a block, and I have to tell you, it just socks everything in, blocks everything up every single day. So I really find it hard to believe that that could occur and that you can get through there within 10, 15, 20 seconds.
All right, are there any other comments? Given the board is unconvinced on several factors on this case, I would recommend we close the hearing tomorrow. Does that make sense? Yes. Okay.
Item number 12, 311-12BZ, 964 Dean Street, Brooklyn.
All right. I think this case is very problematic, and I believe that their papers are confusing. I think they are not consistent in what arguments that they're relying on, and I think there isn't anything to support this, at least at this point. The applicant has argued that this is an obsolete building on various factors. One, that it has floor plates that are, in this case, 7,800 square feet and are too large because the market is, in this neighborhood, is for 500 to 3,000 square feet, and this would require the applicant or the building to include subdividing the space into multiple tenant space, and therefore it reduces the efficiency of the building. I don't think there's anything to support that. I just don't see it. I don't know where they've come up with this is the square footage. I know that, yes, we do have one letter from a real estate broker, but I don't think it really documents the kinds of uses in the surrounding area. Then they've talked about lack of the floor to ceiling heights. I think the board noted that the first two floors are appropriate, but maybe the second and the third and the fourth may not be. They talk about the column spacing, and I think Commissioner Otley Brown, you had a comment about the column spacing.
Well, it just didn't appear to me like the columns were that close together where it would compromise an office. I mean, you need desks and maybe cubicles, but I don't think that you need these wide open spaces without columns. I mean, if you look at it here, we have columns too, and we have office space and congregation space that doesn't seem to be in any way, shape, or form disrupted.
They talk about the location of the freight elevator. Well, first of all, the building is lucky that it has an elevator. We've seen other cases where you don't have it. And I looked at that location. Its location is not way into the interior of the building. Yes, it's not right in the front, but that is, in my opinion, elevate itself to be an unnecessary hardship. And then they talked about lack of parking. So they made this argument, and then they've made an alternative argument in looking at the uniqueness of the building, which is then looked at in the context of whether it's in a major intersection, whether the floor plates are large enough, whether there's lack of parking, and whether it's used for conforming use. So I don't know what the applicant is trying to say here. He's done an analysis about how this building is different from others based on one set of factors, and then he has another set of factors which he's used on the other hand. If you look at this building and you see other buildings in manufacturing districts, this is actually a better building than some of the others because, in fact, they do have a freight elevator and it has a large enough floor plate. I just don't see how this building is unique and has hardships that other buildings don't have. And I think, I said this before, I think the top 2 floors are the only ones where maybe there's a real issue, given that one floor plate's actually much smaller, and the floor-to-ceiling heights or floor-to-floor heights are 9 and 10 feet. But I don't know. That was my feelings about this case. Vice Chair?
No, I concur.
Okay. I think if the applicant, if they want to salvage this case, they should just look at the top 2 floors. Otherwise, I think we should also proceed in possibly closing this hearing. Okay.
Item number 13, 347-12BZ, 42-31 Union Street, Queens.
The applicant's asked for an adjournment.
Item number 16, 65-13BZ, 123 Franklin Avenue, Brooklyn.
All right. As you know, the board has seen cases before for small sites that are vacant or partially vacant along Franklin Street. I just want to say one thing about this case before we even get to the findings. I think the applicant has not done a very good job in researching this case and providing information which is clear and cogent. They talk a lot about the history of the site. If you go to the C of O, the C of O is actually for 3 lots, 7, 8, and 9, that were all used together in 1960, which includes the parking space in the center and 2 residential buildings. Now, from that time to what we have right now is a site that's been subdivided where now you have a lot 108 that somehow has been subdivided from the other lots. And I think it calls into question the premise that this is a small lot because it's unclear how it was created and whether it was self-created. We asked them to do this research last time. I think it was completely ignored. So if you're talking about one lot with 2 buildings and this parking in the center, you have a 7,500 square foot lot. It's hard to claim that that's a small site. So it's almost a threshold issue that they should sort that out. But let us assume that their site is valid with lots, I think it's 9 and 108. And why don't we just move on from there? Commissioners, comments or questions? Thoughts? All right. I had some concerns about their obsolescence of building argument. The building is not detached. It's actually semi-detached. So their argument that somehow this building, unlike others of the same vintage, can shake and move because it's not supported, it's a little bit questionable. I think my other concern is that their documentation shows that this building is like other buildings in terms of vintage and construction, but they go on to note that 50 years of lack of maintenance has created a problem for this building, so that seems to be self-created. So we have a situation here where you have existing buildings along Franklin Street that are very similar. They're wood frame buildings of a certain size and a certain vintage, and it's unclear why we should support that this building is obsolete and therefore should be torn down and redeveloped into a 5-story building that is, in my opinion, very out of scale, or I think it's now 4 stories, but still fairly out of scale, when in fact there may not be any hardship on the site. The other building still exists, and we could still use this space as parking. So I wasn't convinced by that either. Any other comments? Okay.
Item number 15, 213-13BZ, 3858-60 Victory Boulevard, Staten Island.
You've asked for an adjournment?
Item number 16, 216-13BZ and 217-13A, 750 Barclay Avenue, Staten Island. We have an adjournment request.
Yes, they've asked for an adjournment. We'll give them an adjournment.
Continued hearing items, item number 17, 252-13BZ, 1221 East 22nd Street, Brooklyn.
All right, questions and comments? Yes.
I'm sorry,
Go
I have no more issue. They've shown the canopy at the side yard is dashed, and they've made the DOB approval notation, so
Okay.
that's fine.
And they've reduced the building height by 3 feet. I think it looks better in the streetscape.
Okay. Any other comments? All right.
Okay, good. Item number 18, 253-13BZ, 66-31 Booth Street, Queens.
All right, any questions or comments?
Did we get a revised statement of facts and findings on this case? I thought we were going to, but I don't recall seeing it.
They did revise this.
Did they?
I believe they did. Let me see, I'm writing, just looking at this. Oh, I have a comment here. Did Chris want the statement to be revised?
The answer was
Yeah,
yes.
yes,
thought
and I don't believe we have it,
I thought I
so.
made it clear at the last hearing, this was the unnumbered pages and the
Yes,
repetitive phrases. and couldn't
that is
really
true.
read it.
All right, we'll ask them to revise their statement. But in content, I think the project is reasonable, correct?
Yes.
They've met their 10%. Okay.
And we also had the question last time about whether or not the
Yeah, this,
the basement was going to be,
right, what they've done
how
is,
they could reduce it in size.
right, and what they've done is now they've shown the existing and the proposed basement square footage is the same because they've taken the same deductions for both.
Correct. So that's fine.
Okay.
Item number 19, 275-13BZ, 404-406 Broadway, Manhattan.
All right, any questions, issues? Commissioner Montanez, I know you had some.
Right, they explained the stop work order and the permits, and they've given us another landmarks certificate of appropriateness regarding the two-story rear extension.
Okay.
So I guess that covers all the bases.
Okay, and we'll just clarify with them that the signage doesn't have to go through landmarks, or they've gone through landmarks. We can confirm that. Okay.
New cases, item number 20, 277-12BZ, 1776 Eastchester Road, the Bronx.
Does the board have any concerns if we call this and the next case together? They're the same owner, same representative, they're just the same site, really, except one is for one building. Okay, good. You're going to call that one right now? Did you just call both?
Order.
Oh, I'm sorry, 251-13BZ, 1240 Waters Place, Bronx.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize there was a second one.
All right, this is for rooftop parking?
Together. Okay.
Yes, questions and comments?
It wasn't clear to me what their edge condition is at the roof. They don't really show what the parapet looks like or lighting, and if they can give us a detail on that, that'd be great.
Yes, particularly, I think the lighting would be helpful. The project, which is at 1776 Eastchester Road, behind that, I believe that the tracks, and then there's residential. I think the other one is further away from residential, but presumably they'll be using the same sort of style or features for both. Okay. Any?
I had a question
Yes.
regarding 1240 Waters Place.
Yes.
I think they were saying that Building H, on that site, has like 923 spaces, but then when they did the parking demand, he said that it had 759 spaces, if they could clarify that. I think there might be some parking on grade outside of the garage, but I don't know if that was part of the parking demand survey.
Okay. All right. Are there any other questions? All right.
Item number 22, 2-13BZ, 438 Targi Street, Staten Island.
All right, questions and comments? It's a variance to legalize an enlargement of commercial space on a site that's in the residential district. Yes, questions and comments?
It wasn't clear to me whether they're requesting a secondary space or whether it's part of the initial space, because they show connection between the two spaces. However, when you look at the plans and at the actual photographs, that there's a roll-up gate and an exterior door. So I'm confused as to exactly what they're asking for.
Right, I thought, my understanding is that they're asking for a separate retail
two
or commercial
separate
space.
retail.
That's what I thought the plans showed.
I think that they show a connection between the two
That's
spaces,
what I thought.
Okay,
right?
all right, maybe I'm wrong.
So if
Okay.
they could clarify that, I appreciate it.
Okay. Other questions? Why don't we talk about the A finding? Yes.
Yeah, I have a question. They talk about their uniqueness is the triangle shape and the fact that it would be, I guess, a partially vacant lot, and they talk about two similar sites in the immediate area, but they don't really discuss the specifics of the other two lots. So if they could do that, that would be great.
Right, I think on that front, if they could actually show us on the map these other sites that they're looking at, there are quite a few sites that are cut through and therefore have triangular spaces or sites or configurations, and it'd be helpful if they can identify why the others are not similarly burdened. This site it's not really underdeveloped, it's just a small site, but if the argument is that these other sites are larger and have more viable retail, then they could speak to that, or have viable residential. Other comments on the A finding? And then we'll go to the, yes, the A?
Well, I would have concerns about, bringing in a second business, I believe.
Okay, we'll get to that in the
Okay.
C finding. Okay, on the B finding, I know I had some concerns. I think when they value their site, they shouldn't value the illegal portion of the site, because they have land price and then they have the building, but they shouldn't include the additional 538 square feet because it's illegal. So the site value should go down as a result of that. That was my comment. Yes, Commissioner?
Right, and if they do, they should build that into the construction costs for the proposed. But to me, there's a lack of clarity completely across the entire report in terms of the way in which the land value and the building are calculated. And to give an example, you're depreciating the building, however, you're also adding construction costs in the proposed in the as-of-right residential, you're including the building, and then you're demoing the building out, and then you're adding in some more building, and it's not very clear. It would just be, I think it just needs to be simplified across the board, and I think if your hardship has to do with the shape and the floor plate, you would probably be better off showing us how a home with an awkward floor plate is not marketable, and then go directly to your proposed. It just would make it much easier.
I agree. I think that if they show the floor plate, they probably could make a fairly convincing argument that nobody's going to build that.
Right.
And then we can look at the existing condition, which is actually the pre-enlargement condition, and whether there's any hardship on that site. And if so, then if this relief is warranted in the additional square footage. You're right, I think it would make it much easier because the financials, particularly the residential scenario, has increased the site value and has duplicated costs
Right.
here and there, and it's, but I think from a common sense standpoint, that site is it's hard to actually make it work, given you have these yards. And it's in fact a site that is substandard to begin with.
I absolutely agree. I mean, because usually when we do accept financials, they do start with a basic land value that stays the same throughout and doesn't change depending on what they're proposing. And I believe we did have a case that did that change, and it just complicated things unnecessarily, and that's what they do here. I think they should stick with one value and show how, with a site like that, there is no possible way you can reap a return that's adequate.
Okay. All right, on the C finding, yes, Commissioner Martinez.
Right. There's already a large amount of signage on the site not complying with any C1 signage. And to put another business on the site with additional signage, to me, would not be good for the residential neighborhood. They also claim that they've never used this enlargement before, but they have 2 violations for an illegal curb cut and for used car sales. So I was wondering where on the lot they were doing that.
Okay. You said that you had some concerns of also the space being used for another retail, did you say?
Right, yes, that there would be an additional business and additional signage.
Okay.
I feel the idea of an enlargement of the existing store is more palatable.
Okay. Other comments? All right.
Item number 23, 31913BZ, 1800 Park Avenue, Manhattan.
As you know, in this particular case, the applicant is asking for a waiver to the parking requirement. They're proposing 123 spaces, which is about 80% of the parking. They're required to do 50%. They're relying on in fact, their papers could be probably better written. They've identified various aspects of the hardship on the site. They've talked about the location of the Metro North Station and the columns, and therefore protections related to those foundations. They've talked about the Second Avenue subway. They've talked about the subsurface conditions as well, including the bedrock, which is fairly deep at certain points, and other conditions on the site which require them to do deep, I guess it's drilled caisson piles. And they've identified the costs associated with that. I think it would be good if their papers kind of said that these are the costs, and an as-of-right development would not be able to reap the return to offset these costs. And the proposal is to have retail, which would get better generate better revenue than parking, and that additional revenue would in fact offset the hardship costs. Somewhere, I think they don't really make a clear statement as to why the as-of-right fails and why the proposal in fact succeeds. So I think they should do that. Questions and comments? Yes. Okay, who wants to go first? Okay, Commissioner Otley Brown, then Commissioner Montanez, then Commissioner Hickson.
Well, I had a question about the parking that they're providing, because their study says that in that general neighborhood, there's 25% ownership of autos, yet they're only providing 18% of the units to have parking. And then they also go on to say that since this area does not really use the maximum amount of parking that should be provided by zoning, they cite to downtown Brooklyn rezoning that changed the amount of required parking from 40% to 20%. So in both scenarios, both based on the neighborhood's ownership as well as based on the new zoning, they're still providing less parking. And I would really want to see them provide at least the 20% parking that they're saying would be more appropriate for zoning in that area. So, and then I also had a question about their parking study, because they talk about the peak period demands, and their study really doesn't study the residential peak period, which is the overnight period. So I want to know what the parking demand is at that period of time.
Right. I think that I would agree. I think the parking demand study basically shows that for most of the day, they need more parking than what's being provided on site. So I think that they should look at a couple of things. One is that they should look to see whether they can increase the parking on site, and there are several ways that they can do it. So at least they're not providing I think the 40% is what they require. They're not providing the 40% where they may not need it, but they should try and provide the amount of parking that would satisfy the demand of this building. So I would ask them to look at that. The ground floor actually has cellar space, which is used for retail. Maybe that can go towards the parking, or at least some of it can. And there may be other ways. I know you had some
Right,
other
maybe
ideas.
they could also revert to the elevator, because they do talk about having an elevator versus a ramp, but the proposed goes back to the ramp situation, so perhaps they can then go back to an elevator.
And that
which
will
should
get
free
more-
up some spaces that could have stackers as well.
Okay. The alternative is that they could look and see if there's parking spaces in the surrounding area that they can lease. So if there are other parking lots or garages, I think that would be helpful if they could do that. In the absence of doing that, then I think perhaps they should really look at their demand study, and are they claiming that they really need this number of spaces? And if so, you would want them to actually assign them somewhere. I think I think that's at least the minimum parking that they should provide on the site or somewhere on other lots.
Right.
Other questions? Yes, Commissioner Montanez and then Commissioner Haynes.
Right. I had some concerns with what they're calling the ideal site, because, we're not really looking for an ideal site, we're looking for a typical site. So I just wanted to, they include in their hardship things like groundwater location, which is really not that shallow, it's fairly deep, and putting in an extra base slab thickness, underpinning. I just want to make sure that their typical site should have underpinning costs, should have dewatering costs if necessary, the thicker base slab, and supportive excavation. Maybe not next to Metro North, but some sort of supportive excavation that we're not really comparing to an ideal site.
Right, because you're saying most sites have supportive
Yes.
excavation, right? And some of these other
Right.
other issues. Okay. Yes, Commissioner.
My comment really echoed what Commissioner Otley Brown has just said. I was wondering why in their as of right, they show an elevator, and they even say in their statement that they could derive additional parking if they were to go back, if they were going to use an elevator. But they don't really say why they would revert to a ramp, which takes up a lot of space. And it would seem to me that they would be able to gain a few more spaces by utilizing an elevator, and I just didn't understand why they discounted that.
Okay. Other comments? Yes.
My only comment is, and I think it's similar to what you said initially, with the deep bedrock, the high water table, the proximity to the transit facilities, and the brownfield costs, they have a total premium cost of over $28 million. And that gets zeroed out by reducing the parking and putting in the retail. And it seems to me, and I kept going to the next page looking for a request for greater relief other than a parking reduction with $28 million worth of hardship costs. It just seems like a weak linkage between the hardship and the relief sought. So,
Right. I think one thing is that, first of all, I question the 28 million, and I think the applicant should speak to that. It seems to me that the $14 million, which is included in holding and prep, and also the cost estimates that they provided to us include both the foundation costs as well as the remediation costs. So I think they've added the two together when in fact it's, my understanding,
separate.
well, it seems to me that the 14 million basically includes both already. So they've added one upon the other. I'm doing this based purely on the cost estimates for each building separately, which they've done. And you'll see, if you look at the line items, they have about 11 million, which are without soft cost, which is for remediation, and then they have the excavation. Because the remediation includes excavation and disposal, and so does the foundation. So that's one question I have. So it may not be 28 million. The second is that they talk about air rights being transferred, and they talk about 168,000 being transferred from these the parcels that are part of the zoning lot. And I believe that that's not correct, because that includes an inclusionary housing bonus over the entire site. Those air rights are not really available to be sold until the inclusionary housing was created. So it's a little bit disingenuous. However, or not disingenuous, but sort of incorrect, I would say. However, if you look at the financial analysis actually looks at the air rights for 127,000, which is correct. And they input costs, which identifies the premium costs of 14 million. And when they put in the base construction cost, they actually put the base construction cost of the best case site. So there's a little bit of a mismatch, but it seems ultimately, I think, it works out okay. So if they actually input 240 million, I think, is what it costs to build the proposed building or the as-of-right building versus 215 or 220 or something for the best case site or typical site. That difference roughly comes out to be what the premium cost is. And so what they've done actually is inputted like 220 million and not 240, and then added the premium cost. I know it's a little bit confusing, but I think in the end, I think the financial seems correct. I'm not actually questioning that. I think it actually turns out to be correct. It's just done in a little bit of a roundabout way. Yes, it hinges on the parking waiver. I think we asked the applicant actually to look at an analysis of a building or a development without the air rights parcels, because the more housing you provide, the more parking you have to provide. And so we asked them to look at a smaller scheme, and I think it showed that it didn't work. While they don't go on to explain it, but I think what they probably want to say is that you need the air rights parcels, in fact, partly to relieve the hardship. And so they're not asking for an FAR waiver, but boils down to a parking waiver for, just more viable retail than parking. So as a result, I think the project is it's a great project for Harlem. They're providing affordable units. All that has been taken into consideration, their financial. So it's a very clean financial, I think. They've got the 421A, they've actually got the tax credits for the Brownsfield also incorporated. And what they're asking for is just parking and not floor area and other aspects. So let's see if we can at least get them to resolve the parking issue and try and get their numbers up. Okay.
Item number 24, 325 13BZ, 3170 Webster Avenue, the Bronx.
All right, questions and comments?
I
Yes.
had a question about exactly how they're basing their waiver. He says that he's got, 15 spaces and he can get that waived, but is that for just his particular space, or is that the building? I believe you have to take into account parking for the entire building to apply that section. Otherwise, everyone would be able to take that waiver and there would be no parking.
I agree.
So I was very unclear about that, if you can take a look at that.
Right. It seems that the space previously it was being used as accessory residential, which itself doesn't generate a parking requirement. It's like a health club or something. And, but they're all providing 31 parking spaces, so it seems that they have to add the 15 to the 31, because now they're converting what was accessory residential to commercial use.
Commercial, right.
So I think they should do an analysis of that, but they should also provide us with the DOB drawings. I think it'd be helpful for us to understand then
I
the
think-
zoning calculations and whether they can trade off this accessory residential for commercial space. Yes.
Right, I believe on the TCO, the use was listed as a use group for a gym. So I question whether they could use that as a PCE.
Right, was it a 4A gym? Okay, all right. I
That's
know
what it
that.
said, because they have a charter school in the building, and I thought
Yes.
maybe they originally said it was going to be
Okay.
part of the charter school. And I was wondering whether they were going to be.
Right, and I said residential, actually I meant accessory to
the
the school. Yeah.
Right. I was wondering if they were going to use any free weights, because they're going to be above a supermarket and I think part of a school lunch area or something.
Right. The only thing I would say is the board hasn't always delved into the structure of the building, and I know we have one PCE that's raised that issue, but
I know.
I would be concerned if that becomes the way we would look at every PCE.
That's true, but
And
recently.
is there anything about this particular PCE that's different from others?
That it's above a different space, and
But that happens all the time. We have PCs
not
on the
always-
second and third floor, so it's very often that we get that. This is a new building, it's a commercial building. We can ask the question.
and a school.
Yes, I understand that, but I still think that that is not what the board has been engaging in, and we have approved so many PCs, and we haven't gone down that road. I don't think we should start doing that now. It's a commercial space below, and it's a new building. They've got their CFO, and Crunch Fitness is no different from any PC that's come before us. There's nothing about this PC that makes it different. So we can ask them if they do free weights. I don't think that necessarily, I don't know ultimately how relevant it is. Okay.
Item number 25, 1-14BZ, 525 West 42nd Street, Manhattan.
All right, questions and comments about this case? This seemed very straightforward.
Pretty innocuous.
Okay. It is.
Item number 26, 2-14BZ, 555 6th Avenue, Manhattan.
Any issues with this particular case?
They
I
have,
think we should note the noise abatement measures.
Oh,
that-
absolutely.
That the community board mentioned. I thought they were reasonable. It is a residential building,
Yes.
and just make sure that the signage is what's on the plans.
right, they have very detailed noise attenuation notes on the plans. I just thought maybe they could just give us a summary letter from their acoustical consultant to just say this is the approach I've taken.
That's good. Okay,
Item number 27, I'm sorry.
go ahead.
Item number 27, 4-14BZ, 1065 Avenue of the Americas, Manhattan.
Any issues with this? It seemed pretty straightforward. Any issues, questions? Okay, good.
This concludes the review session for April 28th.